So we will learn about developmental concepts in this chapter. So we're going to talk about principles of growth and development, and then theorists and their different theories, as well as how do we apply these theories to our nursing care. Here are the learning objectives for Chapter 22. Please take the time to read them on Canvas. So on this slide, I have the definition of both growth and development. This is on page 575 in your textbook. So I feel like these are important since that's the basis of our chapter. So know the definitions for growth and development. And humans grow and develop throughout life. Therefore, it's important for the nurses to understand growth and development because we care for people from birth until death. So everyone has a physical development and has been predetermined by our genes or genetics because the genetic material from your parents is on your chromosomes that helps develop your physical attributes, right? Then you may have some environmental factors throughout your life from birth, on that may influence the development of the person as well, more on a psychosocial level. And this could be positive or negative. These interactions initially are from our caregivers or family. And the nurse must understand how these variables interrelate, right? So growth and development, the second title here, subtitle, has the principles of growth and development. So the explanation for each of these principles listed is on box 22-1, page 577. It talks about orderly, sequential. These are all the principles of growth and development. Continuous and complex. Follow regular and predictable trends. Are both differentiated and integrated. So growth and development is individualized. However, even though it's individualized, there is an expected growth and development pattern for humans. So when the child goes to the doctor, they're expecting them to sit up at a certain age and be able to hold their head up at a certain age, or be able to walk at a certain age, or talk at a certain age, right? Aspects occur at different stages and rates and can be modified. So even though we have an expectation of a pattern of growth and development, it's usually a range. So a child can develop their speech between this age and this age, or maybe walk on their tippy toes. If you take your child to the doctor for a physical, they'll ask them to do things like stand on one leg, walk on their tippy toes, and it's a range. So one child might be able to do that at 5, another child might be able to do that at 7, but there is a range in which this normal pattern of development is expected. So the pace is specific to each person. Okay, so these are all principles of growth and development. You can find them on 577, box 22-1. All right, so then I also want to emphasize that you should know these principles of growth and development. Okay, so these are factors influencing growth and development from page 575 to 578, I believe, talks about, or 579, talks about each individual bullet here in more detail. So for genetics, so we all have the same amount of chromosomes from our parents, and our DNA is etched in these chromosomes and this sequential coding that makes up our individuality. Then we have prenatal care. So those factors include maternal age, prenatal care, whether the mother, while the fetus was in utero, received proper prenatal care, had adequate nutrition or inadequate nutrition, and substance abuse. So all these things can impact growth and development as well. And this is mainly going to affect the fetal growth and development. Then we have environment and nutrition, which kind of relates with our social determinants of health. So environmental and nutritional factors, and they influence all stages of development. So all throughout life, environmental factors and nutritional factors influences a person's growth and development. That sounds important. I believe all of these are important. Anytime you see factors that influence, I would suggest that you know them. Social determinants of health: poverty, violence, unsafe living conditions, presence of lead or mold in a house, the quality of air, the air they're breathing, and the water that they're drinking and using on a regular basis. These all will fall under social determinants of health, and these can also impact the growth and development of a person or a child. But not only a person, not only a child. So know all these factors that influence growth and development. The roles of genetics in growth and development. So at conception, everyone has 23 pairs of chromosomes that they receive from their parents. Okay, and this is your genetic makeup. This is what makes you uniquely you. It is individualized, and even though your siblings have similar characteristics, their makeup is completely different than yours. You can look alike or not look alike at all, right? You can have very similar personality characteristics or just opposite. However, what I do want to emphasize is genetics also influences the development of many diseases. So there are a lot of things that are genetically inherited um, from a health aspect, right? So keep that in mind that some diseases will run in the person's genes and are inherited. So let's talk about the definition of um, heredity. So heredity refers to the transmission of genetics or genes. So what was passed down to you from your parents, that is heredity. Okay. So then below I have genomics and epigenetics. So I want you to notice both of these definitions. Genomics is the study of the structure and interaction of all genes in the human body. Okay? The study of structure and interaction of all genes within the human body. Epigenetics is generally defined as the study of the changes that occurs in an organism due to modification of gene expression and heritability. All right, not a change in the DNA sequence. So an organism is a human. A human is considered an organism, which is the highest level. For those who are in HBHD, you understand what I'm saying. So we're going from chemicals or an atom up to the largest organism, which is a human. Okay, so epigenetics is generally defined as the study of the change that occurs in the organism. So you can say the change that occurs in a human due to modifications of genetic expression, heritability, and not the DNA changes in DNA sequence. All right, and these are found in your textbook, and it looks like the role of genetics starts 575 to 578. So human development and behavior has been studied since the beginning of the 20th century. Many theories seek to explain the typical human response to specific age and stages of life. So on page 580, there's a table 22-1, which summarizes the developmental theorists in this chapter and what their focus were on. So Freud is considered the father of psychiatry, and his Piaget was Erikson. So Sigmund Freud focus was on psychosexual, and if you'll see, Erikson kind of evolved and made his own developmental theory, and his is slightly different, and he made his psychosocial. So Erik Erikson is known for developmental stages. Then you have Piaget, who was focused on cognitive, which then stops, it looks like, for school age. And then you have Havertz developmental stage as well, which goes through adulthood. All right, so here's a list of some of the theorists, or all the theorists we'll be talking about in this lecture. Freud, theory of analytical development. Piaget has a theory of cognitive development, and that's important for you to know. Erik Erikson has a theory of psychosocial development. That's important for you to know. Erik Erikson worked under Freud. Freud has many different aspects to his theories, so I will understand each of those, but especially the id, ego, superego. But I would definitely understand everything of Freud since he's like the father of psychiatry. Havertz theory is based on developmental tasks, and Havertz talks about like different stages all the way through adulthood of what should be occurring for the individual. Then you have goal theory based on specific beliefs and developmental phases. Levinson theory is based on organizing concepts of individual life structure. Kohlberg theory of moral development. Gilligan conception of morality from the female's point of view. And Fowler theory of faith development. Sigmund Freud is considered the father of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis focuses on discovering the causes of the client's unconscious and repressed thoughts, feelings, and conflicts, which are believed to cause anxiety. And also, psychoanalysis helps to gain insight into conflicts and anxieties and how to resolve these problems. Freud and analytic therapy techniques focused on free association, dream analysis, as well as interpretation of a person's behavior. According to Freud, there are three levels of awareness: the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. So the conscious level refers to perceptions, thoughts, and emotions that exist in a person's awareness, such as being aware of happy feelings or thinking about a loved one. The preconscious thoughts and emotions are not currently in a person's awareness, but he or she can recall them with some effort. For example, an adult remembering how they felt as a child or thought as a child. The unconscious is a realm of thoughts and feelings that motivates a person even though he or she is totally unaware of them. According to Sigmund Freud, a human's personality is composed of three different components: the id, the ego, and superego. The id is the part of one's nature that reflects basic innate desires such as pleasure seeking behaviors, aggression, and sexual impulses. The id seeks instant gratification. The superego is a part of a person's nature that reflects moral and ethical concepts, values, and parental and social expectations. Therefore, it is direct opposition of the id or to the id. The third component is the ego. And the ego balances or is a meditating force between the id and the superego. The ego represents mature and adaptive behavior that allows a person to function successfully in the world. Freud believes that anxiety results from the ego's attempts to balance the impulse instincts of the id with the stringent rules of the superego. Freud also developed the concept of transference and countertransference. Transference refers to when a client displaces onto his therapist the attitude and feelings that the client originally experienced in another relationship. Transference patterns are automatic and unconscious in a therapeutic relationship. For example, an adolescent female client working with a nurse who is about the same age as the teenager's mother might react to the nurse like she reacts to her parents. She might experience intense feelings of rebellion. She might make sarcastic remarks. These reactions are actually based on her experience with her mother or parents rather than her experience with the nurse. Countertransference occurs when a therapist displaces onto the client attitudes or feelings from his or her past. For example, a female nurse who has a teenage child and who is experiencing extreme frustration with an adolescent client may respond by adopting a parental and chasing tone with the client. The nurse is counter-transferring her own attitude and feelings toward her children onto the client. Nurses can deal with countertransference by examining their own feelings and responses, using self-awareness, and talking with their colleagues. Freud's theory on defense mechanisms was developed by both himself and his wife Anna. Freud believed that the self or ego uses ego defense mechanisms, which are methods of attempting to protect the self and cope with basic drives or emotional, painful thoughts, feelings, or events. These are 12 of the defense mechanisms that Freud and Anna developed together. There is a comprehensive list of the defense mechanisms on page 42 and 43 of your book in table 3.1. Please refer to them. It has the defense mechanism as well as the definition and an example of that particular defense mechanism. We will review some of the 12 listed, and I will give you a few examples, as his list is exhaustive and we're not going to spend that much time on Freud's defense mechanisms. So compensation is considered overachievement in one area to offset a real perceived deficiency in another area. So many of you might be familiar with the Napoleon complex. Or another example can be a nurse with low self-esteem working double shifts so that her supervisor will like her. Okay, now I am going to skip down to projection. Projection is unconscious blaming of unacceptable inclinations and thoughts on an external object. So an example of this is a man who has thoughts about same-gender sex relationships but never had one beats up a man who is gay. All right, we're going to now jump down to regression. Regression is moving back to a previous developmental stage to feel safe or have needs met. So an example of this is a 5-year-old who asks for a bottle when new baby brother is being fed. Or a man who pouts like a 4-year-old if he's not the center of his girlfriend's attention. And we'll review one more, repression. So repression is excluding emotional, painful, or anxiety-provoking thoughts and feelings from conscious awareness. So some examples of this is a woman who has no memory of the mugging she suffered yesterday. Or a woman who has no memory before the age of 7 when she was removed from abusive parents. So I only hit a few defense mechanisms. Again, Sigmund Freud has a very exhaustive list of defense mechanisms in your textbook, Table 3.1, on page 42 and 43. They are available for your reading pleasure. I have two charts that describe the developmental stages. One is from Sigmund Freud's psychosexual stages. The other one is Erik Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. Erik Erikson was a protege of Dr. Sigmund Freud, and he went on to develop his own theory for psychosocial development. So Sigmund Freud had 5 different stages. The first stage is the oral phase. And in the oral phase, the child is properly weaned off of feeding and establishes trust. In the event that they are not properly weaned off, they develop a oral fixation when they grow up, which could lead to addiction and other bad habits. The next phase is the anal phase. In the anal phase, the gratification for this child has to do with their ability to control their bowels and bladder. The next stage is the phylaic stage, and this is when boys are attached to their mothers and contend or rival against their fathers for their mother's attention, and girls do the same towards their fathers. Then we have the latency phase, and in the latency phase, children spend most of their time interacting mostly with the same sex peers. And then lastly, Freud has the genital stage, which is beyond puberty. And in the genital stage, sexual urges are reawakened and they are directed more towards the opposite sex and peers. Individuals in this stage form ego and their superego and can balance their wants, which is their id, with their reality, their ego, and their ethics, their superego. Now, as for Erikson, Erik Erikson has um, 8 developmental stages. His first stage of development is the stage of trust versus mistrust, which is very similar to Freud's. His age range goes to 18 months. Nevertheless, it is still in the infant stage. Then we have autonomy versus shame and doubt, which is the toddler stage. And this age ranges from 18 months to 3 years old. The preschooler is initiative versus guilt, and that's age 3 to 5. And then we have the grade schooler or industry versus inferiority, and that's age 5 to 13. And our teenager or adolescent stage is identity versus role confusion, and that's from age 13 to 21. Then we have intimacy versus isolation, which is our young adult stage, and that's age 21 to 49. Generativity versus stagnation, and that's middle age adult between the age of 40 and 65. And the later years, which is integrity versus despair, and that's the older adult, and that's age 65 onward or till death. So we will not get into depth about any of these stages for Erikson or Sigmund Freud development because you will address these again in pediatrics. You will focus more on the child stages, but you will address the psychosocial development in pediatrics more intently. So Erik Erikson, developmental theory, expanded from Freud's work. His also included cultural and social influences in addition to biological responses. His theory was based on 4 major organizing concepts, which I have listed here. Stages of development. On the previous slide, I actually included Erikson's stages of development, 8 stages of development, and how they were broken down into different age groups. Then you have developmental goals and tasks, psychosocial crisis, and the process of coping. So on page 582 through 583, it talks about each of Erik Erikson's developmental stages. So Erikson believed that development is a continuous process with distinct stages characterized by achieving developmental goals that are affected by social environment and significant others. So he has 8 stages. An unsuccessful resolution at any one stage may delay progress through the next stage, but mastery can occur later. So Erikson's belief was that a person needed to master a stage before moving on to the next stage. So then the person would stay stagnant in a developmental stage of life. Okay, if in fact they did not master or they were unsuccessful at resolving any issues. And that also had a lot to do with the environmental influences. So parents can then hinder their child's growth and production, but the person can master that stage later on. So maybe they didn't receive what they needed at home as a child. However, when they're older, let's say a young adult or a teenager, they realize, okay, I don't trust people because my mother believed to let the baby cry themselves to sleep. So therefore, I'm going to work on trusting people. I'm going to work on being more trusting and make a conscious effort to not mistrust automatically, right? So they can develop that mastery um, later on in life. Here we have a picture of Dr. Maslow, the father of the hierarchy of needs. Dr. Maslow was born in Brooklyn, New York. He initially went to school for law, and then he decided to pursue psychology at the University of Wisconsin. Dr. Maslow focused on 5 broad needs. The first being physiological, next, safety and security, the third, love and belonging, fourth, esteem, and the fifth one is actualization of self. Dr. Maslow led a humanistic movement which grew out of the assumption that people have a natural tendency to be friendly, cooperative, and constructive. His theory was a client-centered theory. And for nurses, there is an importance on human potential and strength. Also, this hierarchy helps nurses to prioritize nursing actions and what the nurse can do for the patient on the continuum of care to meet their needs. Dr. Maslow and Rogers are both humanistic theorists. Here we have a picture of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how it is sectioned off into client-centered needs. And Dr. Maslow believed in unconditional positive regard, genuineness, empathy, and understanding, which also supported Rogers' view of client-centered therapy. So first we have the physiological needs and safety needs, which fall under very basic needs for human survival. Then we have belonging and love needs, and esteem needs, what falls under a psychological need for a human. And then we have self-actualization, which is achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. And that falls under self-fulfillment needs. Jean Piaget, he developed the 4 stages of cognitive development. This theory explores how intelligence and cognitive function develops in children. Dr. Piaget believes the human intelligence progresses through a series of stages based on age, with a child at each successive stage demonstrating a higher level of functioning than the previous stage. Piaget strongly believed that biological changes and maturation were responsible for cognitive development. So the first stage is sensory motor, and that's when a child begins to interact with their environment. And that is from birth to 2. The preoperational stage begins at the age of 2 and it goes to about 6 or 7. And the child begins to represent the world symbolically. So as you see, this young lady has a stethoscope and she's listening to the bearer's heart. In the concrete operational stage, the child learns rules such as conservation. And this stage begins approximately 6 or 7 and goes up until approximately 11 or 12. And in the formal operation stage, adolescents can transcend the concrete situation and think about their future. So this is from ages 12 to adulthood. So Robert Habeshurst described learned behavior as developmental tasks that occur at a certain period of life. So an successful achievement leads to happiness and success in later tasks, whereas unsuccessful achievement leads to unhappiness, societal disapproval, and difficulty with later tasks. The developmental tasks arise from maturation, personal motives, and values that determine occupational and family choices and civil responsibilities. So the stages of developmental tasks are divided into categories according to different age groups. So we have infancy and childhood, middle childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, middle adulthood, and later maturity. So on page 583 over to 585, there's bullets under each developmental task that describes these different stages. I am not reading all these to you. However, I will go to middle childhood, special attention to that one. So for middle childhood, developmental tasks for middle childhood include learning physical skills, especially for games, learning to get along with peers. That's very important. That is middle childhood. Developing developmental skills for reading, writing, math, developing a conscious morality and a set of values, achieving personal independence. So Robert Gohl is a psychiatrist trained in psychoanalytic therapy. So he studied individuals between the age of 16 and 60. The central theme of his theories are transformation, adult transformation, and identifying specific beliefs and developmental phases. So his theory begins with adulthood. So it starts with age 18 to 22, and he has that designated as the leaving the parent's world. Then you have 22 to 28, getting into the adult world. Then you have questioning and re-examining, which is 29 to 34 age range. Age range 35 to 43 is middle life decade. Age range of 43 to 50 is reconciliation and meddling. Age of 50 and older is stability and acceptance. So his theory concentrates on adulthood. Also, on page 585, you will find Roger Gohl's more further explanations about each stages. So please read through that. Make sure you're acquainted with that. All right. Daniel Levison and Associates theory is based on organizing concepts of evolution of the individual structure, The theory centers on the belief that the cycle of life at any point in time is formed by the interaction of three components. So the first component is self, which includes values and motives. The second component is social and cultural aspects of one's life, which includes family, career, religion, racial, ethnic background. The third component is a particular set of roles in which one participates. So your role in your home, so it could be husband, wife, father, friend, student. And this is on page 585, extends over to page 586, talking about the different phases. So our next slide, we'll talk about the phases. So 585 over to 586 explains these phases in detail. So we have our novice phase, and that age range is from 17 to 22. The major concerns of the young adult are to break away from their parent or guardian and to make initial career choices and establish intimate relationships. So many separations, losses, transformations are necessary to terminate old relationships. This is also a time to begin to select personal values and establish goals as young adult life structure begins to to more integrate. Entering adulthood is in the mid to late 20s is what the book says. However, it says age 22 to 28, and it says a time to build on previous decisions and choices, and to um, try different careers and lifestyles. Then we have our age 30 transition, and this represents a transitioning time ending around age 33, during which the overriding task of the novice phase to establish a place in the world and create a viable, suitable life structure. This is time to reflect, and it allows for reconsideration of choices and opportunities to make changes. Next stage is settling down and building a second adult life structure. In the settling down phase, ages 33 to 40, the adult invests energy into the areas of their life that most personally are important. The areas of investment are primarily family, work, and community. The person strives to gain respect, status, and a sense of authority. So in our midlife transition, age 40 to 45, midlife transition involves a reprisal of goals and values. The person establishes lifestyles and may continue to and may establishes lifestyles and may continue or may choose to reorganize and change careers. This is an unsettled time when a person often is anxious and fearful. There is a focus on leaving a legacy and how short life is. Entering mid-adulthood, by the age of 45 to 50, a person has made choices and formed a new life structure. This allows for time to commit to new tasks. So, theories of moral development. Lawrence Kohlberg, this is his theory, moral development. So, Kohlberg developed a theory of moral development using levels that closely follow Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So I have a note to see box 22-3. Colbert recognized that a person's moral development is influenced by culture. So he has 3 levels here. So there is the pre-conventional level, the conventional level, and the post-conventional level. So this is on both 586 and 587. Pre-conventional level. Colbert's pre-conventional level of moral development is based on external control as the child learns to conform to rules and imposed by authority figures. And then it has different stages. So stage 1, punishment and obedience orientation. Stage 2, instrumental relativist orientation. And I would suggest you read all of these on 587. Conventional level. The conventional level of moral development involves identifying with significant others and conforming to their expectations. And then here we have stage 3, which is the stage of good boy or girl orientation, and stage 4, law and order orientation. Then we have post-conventional level. Post-conventional level of moral development involves moral judgment that is rational and internalized as standards of values. And then we have stage 5, social contract and utilitarian law orientation. And then we have stage 6, our universal ethical principle orientation. So on page 587, it talks about Carol Gilligan. Carol Gilligan worked very closely with Lawrence Colbert. However, she noticed that men and women have different ways of looking at the world. And in her theory, she stated that men were more likely to be associate morality with obligation, rights, and justice, whereas women were more likely to see moral requirements emerge from the need of others within the context of relationship. Therefore, Carol Gilligan's theory is focused on women. That's where her studies were focused. She also has the same 3 stages as Colbert, and it starts on page 587, and but hers is just focused towards women. So women and girls develop morality as a response to caring for others. Okay, so for stage level 1, she has pre-conventional, and then it says selfishness. So in level 1, the focus is on girls and women's own needs. Should and would are the same. Morality is seen in terms of sanctions by society. Stage 2, moral judgment. Stage 2 is conventional, which is goodness. Moral judgment is based on sharing norms and expectations, and societal values are adopted. Acceptance by others become critical, and the ability to protect and care for others become the defining characteristics of female goodness. Then we have stage 3, post-conventional nonviolence. In stage 3, changed understanding, self, and a redefinition of morality allows reconciliation of selfishness, and responsibility. James Fowler, this is page 588. So I would suggest you go and read about each stage there. So James Fowler has a theory of faith development. And so Fowler describes faith as faith is not always religious in context or content. Faith is a person's or group's way of moving into the force field of life. So the developmental theory of spiritual identity, based on the work of Piaget, Kohlberg, and Erickson. This is where Fowler's foundation for his faith-based theory came from. So we have a pre-stage undifferentiated faith. Stage 1, intuitive projective faith. Stage 2, mythical literal faith. Stage 3, synthetic conventional faith. Stage 4, individuative and reflective faith. Stage 5, conjunctive faith. Stage 6, universalizing faith. And all these stages are described on page 588. So please read through those. So on the next two slides, we'll talk about how do we apply these theories of growth and development to nursing care. So 588 to 589, special attention to box 22-4. It kind of sums up these last two slides. I just have some bullets here, which are mainly introductions to box 22-4. So box 22-4 talks about incorporating principles and theories of growth and development. Okay, so first, know the various stages of cognitive, social, moral, and spiritual development. So the nurse needs to learn that in order to realize what stage a person's in and being able to care for them appropriately. Maintain flexibility in assessing patients and respect the uniqueness of each person, because everyone's an individual and therefore should be treated as an individual. We do have cultural assessments, and culturally competent nurses are encouraged. However, you cannot just lump a person into a category. They may be, they may not be your ideal person that you see, right? So everyone's individual. Anticipate possible regression during difficult periods or times of crisis. Understand that environmental and cultural influences have a strong effect on development. Know that within each stage of the development, a person may retain behaviors of a previous stage, attain goals of the current stage, and inhibit behaviors of the next stage. Remember that each patient is members of families and that the family unit can have positive and negative influences on the development of the individual person or individual members. Be ready to provide health care to patients who are ill or fail to meet the developmental goals. Provide environments and experiences that are developmentally challenging.